Hello everyone, welcome. I'm going to wait while we get a few faces on here before I dive into this topic for today, which I have been writing about for almost a decade. And just yesterday I posted a piece on my Substack, it's called Truth Activist, on how I was put on antidepressants when I was 12 years old and what I learned from that experience. I'm really grateful for that experience of medical malpractice and abuse, that I experienced abuse from my parents and abuse from the doctors who prescribed me those drugs at that age, because it gave me a first-person experience with the psychological aspects and the spiritual aspects of medicating our emotions. And let's talk about that. So, hey everyone, hey Allison. Hello everyone. All right, this is one of the most triggering, volatile, angering topics that I have discussed over the years, which means, guess what? We got to talk about it more, right? Because the answer to when something is triggering and volatile and it creates reactivity, the answer is not to talk about it less, it's to talk about it more, to talk about it with gentleness and compassion and curiosity. So let's bring all of that to the table and let's talk about antidepressants, medical malpractice, pharmaceutical warfare, silencing the shamans, and the common thread, abusive relationships. I'm going to get into this a little bit later, but I can promise you, everyone who is taking an antidepressant is in an abusive relationship, okay? They might be in an abusive relationship with their own limiting beliefs, with their own generational patterns, with their culture, with their government, with their definition of God, with their religion, with family members, but that is always the common thread that I've seen in my years of research and working with clients and just going through the world looking out for this pattern. All right. This is also something I discussed in my book, The Invisible Corset, which is about the limiting beliefs women have that keep us as uncomfortable and restricted in our bodies as traditional corsets once did. But women are in abusive relationships with the beauty standard these days. So there are so many ways that we are trying to treat the pain of staying in abuse medically instead of leaving that abuse, which at the end of the day is the only real solution, okay? So, yes, let me say this. My perspectives on pharmaceutical drugs, particularly antidepressants, can sound really extreme to some people. And that's probably why when I've written about this, I've gotten a lot of volatile responses. But my perspectives are not extreme. They're actually quite balanced and reasonable and fact-based. What's extreme is the lies and the propaganda of the pharmaceutical industry. We have been extremely lied to about how our bodies work, how our souls work. I mean, Western medicine has tried to erase the concept of spirituality and soul entirely. Talk about a huge lie. That is extreme, that our healthcare system is trying to help people heal without even recognizing the presence of their soul. That is extreme. We have been extremely lied to. We've been extremely lied to about the so-called efficacy of antidepressants. So what I have to share with you today is data. It's spiritually based information. And it's very balanced. I'm not the extreme one. The pharmaceutical industry is so extreme in its lies, and that is why a lot of heated emotions and reactivity can come up when I discuss this. Okay? So the other thing that I often hear, I want to address this up front before I dive in further, is that I'm medication shaming. When I talk about the real data behind antidepressants and my spiritual sight of how those drugs work in people, I'm told that I'm shaming people, or I'll be told, stop medication shaming. Okay, none of my message contains shame at all. I have never once in my message to all of you said, shame on you if you're doing this. I don't even say you're better if you're not taking antidepressants and you're a worse person if you are. I don't use those hierarchy terms or those judgmental terms when I'm discussing taking medication or not taking medication, because there is no hierarchy to this, okay? It's just a matter of where you are on your healing journey. And if you are in the place of using pharmaceuticals, that's exactly where you should be. That's part of your journey. And I'm here to offer you very liberating information that you can take. Maybe you reject it today. Maybe it lands like a little seed. Maybe you're ready to run with it, with the information I share, right? But you can take that and you can use it on the rest of your journey. Okay, so if somebody is feeling shame when they hear the data or the stories of healing that I have to share, I gently remind you that shame is originating in you. It's not coming from my message. So no, I'm not medication shaming. Neither is my message extreme, okay? All right, now what's interesting is how much people hold on to their stories around antidepressants. And I really see some common threads in responses to my posts and my articles about antidepressants. One is sometimes they're necessary. Maybe you've heard this, maybe you believe this. Another common thread that I see is, well, antidepressants saved my life, or antidepressants really helped me. And here's the thing. Scientifically, when we look at the data, we cannot say, based on the studies and the data that has been done, that antidepressants have saved a single life. There's no scientific data to back that up. So what do we do when people say that they have had those experiences and that is their lived experience? Well, antidepressants don't save lives. Your mind saves your life. When we look at the data, antidepressants are no more effective than placebo. Placebo is a really derogatory term that the medical industry created to explain away and diminish the most powerful healing mechanism we have in our hands, which is the power of our consciousness, okay? That is intentional, that the medical industry tried to diminish this and gives it this like condescending tone. Oh, it's just the placebo response. It's just your consciousness that has the ability to free you completely from being chained to the pharmaceutical industry for the rest of your life, okay? So that is my response to those two frequent rebuttals, I guess I could say, people have when I discuss the inefficiency of antidepressants. And when people are in that place of defending this medication that doesn't work, and I'm going to get into that, but just if you're in that place right now, have some curiosity around why are you holding on to your story? Because we heal when we're willing to question our stories. The esoteric text, A Course in Miracles, says something along the lines of, in order to heal or in order to experience miracles, you must be willing to question every value that you hold. You must be willing to question all of your beliefs. I love this comment here. Mad in America was such an illuminating book on this subject. That was from the VSL. I completely agree. That is a very, very great read. If people are curious into the real data behind psychotropic drugs. Thank you for that book recommendation there. So that is what happens before we dive into healing, is we are justifying and we're validating our stories and validating our excuses. Healing happens when we're willing and ready to question all the beliefs that we hold, all of our most deepest values, which means we're willing to be wrong. That is why I have healed so profoundly in my life from all these things that people say are incurable to heal. Those are all stories for another time and things I've talked about in my posts and my articles. But I have been willing to be so wrong about what I've believed. I've been willing to be so humbled. Because let me put it this way. If we're sick, that means that we are holding on to beliefs and values that create a state of disease. We are holding on to those beliefs and values because we think they're right, but they're not. They're making us sick. So in order to heal, we have to be willing to be wrong about what we think is truth. We have to be willing to let go of those illusions to allow more truth in. And that's why healing is so uncomfortable, because we have to be willing to be wrong over and over. And in fact, we have to be willing to pray. Oh God, oh universe, show me where I'm wrong. Humble me. Oof, what an uncomfortable prayer. That one hurts. I don't like that one. I wish there was another way to healing and spiritual enlightenment that allowed me to bypass the whole humbling experience and like realizing everything I believed was wrong. But I don't think there is. And once you start going down that journey, you can actually start to run into those experiences head first, because you know you're going to hurt for a little while, but then you're going to come out into the light and just be filled with so much more joy. Okay, so let's dive into what I'm going to call my 3 extreme beliefs around antidepressants. Like I have said, not extreme. What's extreme is the lies and propaganda of the pharmaceutical industry that just makes it sound like I'm the crazy one. No, I'm very rational and sane about this. It's the pharmaceutical industry that's the crazy one, okay? This is what happens, by the way, when you start to whistleblow or speak the truth around an abuser, like these industries that I speak out against, like the pharmaceutical industry, like the plastic surgery industry. They're really good at making the truth tellers the crazy ones. If you've ever been in a narcissistic relationship, you know how this works. Well, as within, so without, okay? Same pattern, same dynamics here. Thanks for the hearts on that one. Okay, so my first extreme belief on antidepressants. Extreme, right? Every prescription for an antidepressant is medical malpractice. Every single one. Because if we look at the scientific literature that has not been funded by the pharmaceutical industry, we see very clearly that these drugs are no more effective than placebo. And I just discussed placebo. It's a very derogatory term the medical industry has used to consciously, purposefully invalidate the healing power of our minds, the free healing power of our minds. So if you want to actually see the breakdown of that data, I have articles on empowered sustenance. You can go to my website there, put in antidepressants, and you'll see a breakdown. The article is called How the Psychiatry Industry Creates the Mental Health Epidemic, or something like that. That's what the article is called. Now, the other reason for this is because antidepressants do not balance neurotransmitters. That's such a myth. People think that this is fact, that depression or even anxiety is caused by imbalanced neurotransmitters. That is just a hypothesis that has been disproven by the scientific method, okay? So if you believe that, you believe pseudoscience. We have absolutely no data that shows depression is related to low serotonin levels. Like, that's the myth, because antidepressants, the most common ones are SSRIs, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. It basically leaves more serotonin in between the neurons. Pardon me for forgetting the terminology right now. But it improves serotonin uptake. And here's the thing. We have no data, no proof that is applying the scientific method properly that shows depression is related to low serotonin levels. I mean, how crazy is that? They have studies where you have, you take normally happy people, you reduce their serotonin levels and they stay happy. Or you take depressed people, you raise their serotonin levels and their mood doesn't change. So the thing here is antidepressants do change neurotransmitters, okay? But they don't balance them. They imbalance them. And in this way, antidepressants are just like recreational drugs. They are not therapeutic. They're not medicinal. They're recreational drugs. Recreational drugs will create an imbalance in your brain that some people interpret as feeling good. Typically, people interpret that as feeling good when they feel bad with reality, okay? When do people get addicted to drugs? When they're not happy with their reality, okay? So they try to change their brain experience instead of changing their reality. It doesn't work that way. It's one strategy, but it's not a very efficient strategy long term. Same with antidepressants, okay? These aren't medical. These are the same as recreational drugs, and that is why it is medical malpractice every single time that they are prescribed. Okay, like I said, my perspectives around this sound extreme, but it's really not when you look at the data, okay? The lies of the pharmaceutical industry are so extreme here. We've been so brainwashed, and it is on my heart to give this information no matter how many people think I'm crazy, no matter how many people hate me for sharing this, because I think one person might just listen to this, and it is the liberating thing that they needed to hear to start taking a journey to getting off these drugs and empowering themselves. So the other extreme belief, my second one that I have around antidepressants, is that antidepressants have saved no lives. I think I mentioned this prior in this live. I got ahead of myself. Some people say antidepressants were my only option. They saved my life. I was near suicide. Well, how does anybody know that the one thing they chose was their only option? Because we live in a universe of infinite possibilities. And really, you take one different choice and you end up in like a whole different timeline, a whole different world of possibilities, of unforeseen events. So it's really a silly thing to say, I had no other possibilities, I had no other options at the time. It's like, well, you didn't see them, but they were still there. Look, I've been there. I've been in that place where I thought I didn't have any other option besides the pharmaceuticals that were presented to me. But that was never the truth. There were always other options. And healing means if we're going to see other options for ourselves now, we have to be able to see the other options we had in the past. And we have to do that without feeling shame, because we're not bad people for not seeing those other options before. We're not bad people for falling prey to brainwashing and industrial strength military grade propaganda. That's just what happens to people, right? So it helps to have that kind of neutral perspective. It really helps to understand the force of the lies that we're up against. This was something I learned in my own experience getting out of an abusive relationship in my 20s, because it would have been really easy for me to look at that situation and think, oh my goodness, Lauren, you were so stupid, you were so foolish, how could you fall in for those lies? But what helped me not think that way, that's not a healthy way to think. It's healthy to take self-responsibility and to analyze the vulnerabilities that I had. But what was also healthy was for me to analyze, why was my abuser so smart that he could pull me, like a very smart, self-possessed person, into this abusive relationship? And from there, I could analyze his playbook and his manipulation. That's a really empowering thing to do. So when we're breaking free from the pharmaceutical industry, it requires that same perspective. Let's look at our vulnerabilities, absolutely. And let's also look at the propaganda, the mind control playbook, the financial funding that we're up against. Let's look at all that, right? And that allows us to have a more neutral perspective and less shame analyzing our choices. Okay. Now, my third extreme belief around antidepressants is everyone who is taking an antidepressant is in an abusive relationship. Okay? Now, That could be an abusive relationship with a person, yes. It could also be an abusive relationship with a religion, with your government, with your workplace, with your definition of God, with your lifestyle, with the beauty standard, as I've talked about in my book, The Invisible Corset. 1 in 4 American women are prescribed SSRIs, antidepressants. That's like, okay, well, 1 in 4 American women aren't having an abnormal emotional response. They're having a perfectly normal response to abnormal cultural expectations, to abnormal spiritual environments. Okay, so here's one interesting parallel. One interesting example. Utah has one of the highest rates of antidepressant use. Also, one of the highest rates of cosmetic surgery. What is there a lot of in Utah? I mean, we could just play this correlational game. What correlates to a really high use of antidepressants in Utah? Mormonism, cults. That is a very abusive relationship with spirituality. It's a relationship with an abusive definition of God, one could say, right? Because even though this is the case with so many religions, it's presented as an avenue towards spiritual connection when in fact it's an avenue towards spiritual control. And various religions will present God as this vindictive, judgmental, hateful, discriminatory being. Well, if you are in a relationship with a God like that, you're going to be depressed, honey. Oh my goodness, you're going to be very unhappy because that's not God, okay? That's not, God is love and God is not a being. God is so far beyond our comprehension. It'd be much better to describe God as a force of consciousness, but truly it is something that is beyond our comprehension, right? So this is really common when people are in an abusive relationship with their definition of God or with their spiritual connection or, their cultural environment, they're going to feel depressed. The solution to that is not to take an ineffective pharmaceutical, okay? Because like I said, that's taking a recreational drug to escape an uncomfortable reality. And yes, maybe it creates a temporarily more comfortable state of your mind, but that hasn't actually solved the solved the problem, because the problem is the reality in which that person exists. And this is why I say everybody who is taking an antidepressant is in an abusive relationship somewhere in their life, maybe multiple places in their life. Now, for me, I mentioned I was put on an antidepressant when I was 12 years old. Talk about medical malpractice. But at the time, I didn't know I was being raised by narcissists. I didn't know that I was raised in this family of generational narcissistic abuse. I didn't know, for example, my mom was taking antidepressants because she thought the solution was to increase her tolerance to an abusive relationship rather than leave the relationship. And so, honestly, maybe she thought she was helping her daughter by giving me antidepressants, right? Because that was the only solution that she knew about. But I will tell you, I was not able to get to a place of healing in my body, like radical healing, until I left abusive relationships. And that's a hard thing to do for people. Like I've said before, this is not like taking a supplement or drinking a green smoothie when we're talking about this level of healing. Leaving abusive beliefs, self-limiting beliefs, and leaving abusive relationships, especially if those are relationships you've been in your whole life, or communities you've been in your whole life, that's huge and that's hard. But when people take an antidepressant and they are in these abusive situations, they're simply increasing their tolerance to abuse. And that is often part of our journey. It's part of our healing journey. It's not a bad thing if you're there, if you're doing that. But it's not the end point of the journey. The end point of the journey is to allow yourself to feel the pain of being in such an unhealthy environment and in those abusive beliefs and relationships, to feel that pain so deeply that it completely derails your life, because that is the sacred purpose of pain. It is supposed to derail your life so that you can realign your life with your soul. This is no small task, and this is not for the faint of heart, but this is where we are with raising human consciousness. This is what we're being called to do right now, and it's possible. I'm living proof. It's not always a fun journey, but it's possible. And when you get out on the other side, here's the amazing thing, is the depth to which you are willing to feel that pain. And look, I have been in those situations where that emotional pain, it was so deep in my body. I mean, it felt like physical pain. Like I remember at difficult moments in my life when I was really processing and leaving situations of abuse, where I would just take walks in the woods for hours every day to deal with the depth of the pain that felt like, I described it like claws had just ripped through my lungs. And I was moaning out loud on my walk from pain, from the emotional pain. That's the depth to which we have to feel in order to get free, okay? The more deeply you feel, the more efficient and effective the process of leaving those abusive beliefs and relationships are. The more efficiently you get free. When I look at my life, I think, yeah, I did that pretty efficiently because I was really willing to go to the depths of that pain. And then on the flip side, you get to feel the depth of that joy. A lot of people think that they have, well, I should say, earlier in my life, I thought that I was feeling happiness and joy at points, but I really wasn't. Like now I know what joy feels like, because I had to do so much unburdening of pain in my body and in my environment. And it was like layer after layer and coming off of my heart. And then my heart was free, and I was like, it blew my mind, the purity of joy that I was able to feel. And that's my prayer for all of humanity. Let's all get there. That is what it feels like in the new world. Okay. So I've covered a lot. I've covered my three extreme perspectives on antidepressants, and let's touch briefly on some basic steps towards healing, because this could be a whole nother live or series of articles. But let me just recap some of the points I've touched on. So the first point of really embarking on a healing journey is the willingness to be wrong. Like I said, if we're in a state of disease, discomfort, or a state of being unwell, that means we have beliefs that aren't serving us. Our beliefs are making us sick. Our environment is making us sick. Our choices are making us sick. Our emotions are making us sick. But at the end of the day, that all comes down to our beliefs, because from our beliefs and subconscious beliefs, we're choosing our environment, our choices, and our emotions. Okay? So we have to be willing to be wrong about what we believe and to see that we're holding on to illusion instead of truth. We have to be willing to consume information, listen to information like what I'm sharing with you today that might make you feel really, really uncomfortable or really, really triggered, because that's the door to healing, is that which makes our ego so uncomfortable. That kind of information which makes our ego just feel so terrified, right? We got to run towards that. We'll be like, yeah, let's go for it. Okay? Now, so willingness to be wrong, big step in healing. Another one is understanding that there's no bad feelings, right? Again, maybe I'll do a whole nother discussion on this, but feeling pain is not a bad thing, and it doesn't mean you're a bad person. Feeling shame and guilt those ones are super uncomfortable. And only when we feel with them and sit them out, we can realize the lies we're telling ourselves, right? The more we run away from feeling those super uncomfortable emotions, then we actually don't get to the lies that are underneath them, or the abusive beliefs that we've been indoctrinated into that are producing those emotions. So there's no bad emotions, and you're not a bad person for feeling anything that you feel. That's simple, okay? And 3, no small task, but courage. Courage is required to leave the environments, the belief systems, and the relationships that are creating our emotional distress. And I have an article that's called 25 Lessons I've Learned About Healing, and the last one and the most important one is we heal in proportion to our courage. Okay? Yes, this is why I say healing is not for the faint of heart. And it takes a lot of courage to actually change our mind, change our relationships, change our spiritual beliefs, change, in my case, like these relationships with my family that I thought I would have in my life forever. But I realized, well, I couldn't be healthy in those relationships. You can't be healthy in a relationship with a narcissist. That's my perspective. Some people might disagree with that. But this is what it takes to heal. Is it easier to take an antidepressant? Is it easier to imbalance our brains instead of addressing the reality that's making us so uncomfortable? It might feel easier in the short term, but in the long term, that's not how we get to the kind of joy and freedom and purpose and pleasure that is so fulfilling. So I'm sharing all this to say, I did it. You can do it too. It was a rough journey at times, but I did it. And if you do want to learn more about, I didn't get into this today, but this, what I'm going to call the vibrational programming of antidepressants and more of a spiritual, intuitive perspective of them, please go read my post that I put on Substack. It's titled something like, I was put on antidepressants at age 12. Here's what I learned about pharmaceutical warfare. Well, to sum that up, what I learned about pharmaceutical warfare is that these are actually intentionally programmed, vibrationally programmed to separate people from their soul. And that was an experience I had when I was 12, and I took the antidepressants for about 2 weeks. And I felt my soul separating from my being, and it scared the living daylights out of me. And it truly was divine intervention that stopped me from swallowing those pills after about 2 weeks. And I have a lot more I could say on that. But I am so grateful, first of all, that I had the experience of the vibrational and spiritual qualities of those drugs, because that's what is happening when we take those drugs. And second, I'm grateful that I was able to stop taking them so quickly. But the truth is, it's always possible to break free from that physical and spiritual influence in those drugs. It's always possible. A lot more resources I could share on this. I just wanted to do more of an overview today. If you want to learn more, I have mentioned a few articles in this live. Like I said, go to empoweredsustenance.com, type in antidepressants. You'll see an article I wrote on the whole psychiatry industry, on the data of antidepressants. And then if you want to dive more into what I've mentioned about the vibrational programming and the spiritual warfare of these drugs, you can check out my Substack article as well. So thank you all for joining me. Oh, and last thing, yes, I am wearing my phototherapy patch here. If you want more information on that, again, I have a link in my profile or wherever I will put this video. You can message me on Instagram if you want more information as well. Definitely one of the biggest pieces in my healing journey, and talk about support for mental health there. All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you all later. Bye-bye.